Hello, welcome to my channel, A Book Forest. My name is Kim, and today I'm going to be talking about the series, the sci-fi and fantasy series I finished before starting Booktube. I think it might give you a good idea of what I like. I am not very well read in fantasy. I have been mostly reading fantasy mainly since 2019. Before that, I dabbled in it, but I didn't really get into it until a few years ago, so I have a lot of catching up to do. I still wanted to talk about the series I finished because that way it will be cataloged in my videos, so that if for some reason I forget what I've read or someone else wants to know, like, it will be there. It's not going to be in any particular order. I just grabbed those off the shelves really quickly. The only one I'm gonna start first is the only sci-fi in the list. It's not that I haven't read a lot of sci-fi, it's just that I haven't finished series about sci-fi. I've read a few standalones and some series I haven't finished yet. So the only one I have finished is Dune. This is a ugly copy of my books. I have beautiful copies at the back here, but I have this series for the main novels, like the 6 novels, and they're so ugly. I grabbed that one because I find this is hilarious. this cover is just so funny to me. Yeah. So the first Dune novel I've read like 3 times. Yeah, 3-4 times. I just love it so much. And I've read all the series a couple of times as well. And I also read most of the Brian Herbert, Kevin J. Anderson series. Of course, it's not as good, but it's enjoyable. But yeah, Dune is one of my favorite series of all time, so I'm probably gonna read it again at some point. I don't think I need to elaborate, everyone knows what it's about. God Emperor is one of my favorites in this series. It's very philosophical, so if you like, it's just out there a bit, but it's fun. Another series I finished, I haven't read, I mentioned Fire and Blood in my other videos about series I want to finish, ongoing series I want to prioritize. I'm going to link it down below. But essentially, I've read all the 5 books that are published in A Song of Ice and Fire, so I think I'm caught up. Yeah, I enjoyed those. They're a bit more grim-dark, that I probably would go for as naturally. That's my husband's fault. I read that before this came out. I was caught up, so I read that when it came out in 2011. And I blame my husband because it's not finished, but I really enjoyed it, and I've gone down a rabbit hole about all the theories about how it's gonna end, if it ends. I'm just waiting. Like, I might pick them up. I'm probably gonna pick them up again because it's been a while since I read them, but I'm gonna wait to see for now if there is an end in sight. If I was George R. Martin, my theory is he's writing both books at the same time because he doesn't want to hear about it ever again. So he's going to announce that he's publishing Winds of Winter, and he's going to publish the next one, hopefully. I know I'm being hopeful, but yeah, that's my theory. That's what I would do. So yeah, the A Song of Ice and Fire is just very, very good. And hopefully, I think it's worth reading even if it's not finished. Another series I finished a while ago was Number in the Ashes. It's a quartet, and I think it's YA. It's kind of YA, but not too YA. Like, it's really that first book is really good. The pacing is amazing. The characters are good, and the action, and it's also very dark. So I really enjoyed this series as a whole. There are some the second book is not that great, but overall, it takes place in the desert, and it's like there's different types of classes of people. Like there's like sort of the Roman soldier types, and there's like the more like Northern African Arabian types, and they are slaves. And our main character here is looking to get revenge, basically, and to save her brother. So that starts like that, and yeah, it's quite good. So if you enjoy YA, or if you enjoy a bit of romance but not too much, yeah, I would recommend that one for sure. Another one I finished a few years ago was, I think it's called Echoes of Empire. Yeah. The first book is Garden of Stones by Mark T. Barnes. It's self-published. And I don't know why I picked it up. I just sort of picked it up on Kindle Unlimited. It's self-published. So, and I really enjoyed it. At first I was a bit overwhelmed. Like the writing is a bit like it's a bit, you can see it was a debut novel. He uses a lot of big words, and he's trying to a lot of descriptions, but it gets tamer as you go on, and it starts really in the action and in a world that's very complex, and you have no idea what they're talking about. Like there's mentions of places and races of people and events, and you have no idea what's going on. I think he was probably inspired by Malazan. I haven't read that, but I've heard that's how it is as well. But you get to it's not that complex, so you become more familiar with the world as you go on, and I really enjoy that. There's a very heavily political, so if you enjoy political fantasy, I would recommend this. And it's also very original. It has like races of people, but there's some humans, there's some like bird-like people, and there's probably a mix of both. Like our main characters are a mix of both, so it's really, really cool. And the bad guys are very interesting. Yeah, so there's horrifying things in this, like things that happen to some of the characters. I was just like, oh, I wouldn't want to live like that. So I recommend this. It's I think it's the only series he's written. It's a trilogy. Very interesting and original. And then I also finished Harry Potter. I read that in the 2000s, so I read that when it came out. That's the last book, of course, the Deathly Hallows. When it came, I remember vividly when it came out. I received my pre-ordered copy. It's the first pre-order I ever did on Amazon, and I received that on like a Wednesday, and my day off was like on Saturday, so I waited until I was off work, because I knew if I started I wouldn't want to stop. So yeah, I loved that series. So I started this book in the morning on Saturday, and I finished it during the night. I think I ate one meal in that day. So I really enjoyed this. So everyone knows about that. And my favorite series of all time, The Lord of the Rings. This is the Two Towers, the second book. I chose that one because I love this illustration. John Howe, I think. Yeah, there's nothing more to say. I have also the nice editions at the back, right there, and I just love it to bits. I've read it since I was about 14, and I've read it every year since, until I had kids, because now I have less time to read, so I stopped rereading it every year because I wanted to read new stuff, but I am due for a reread. I'm doing it on audio at the moment. I'm reading The Hobbit, and I'm gonna keep going with the rest of the series, and it's just a masterpiece. Another series I got into a few years ago was The Wheel of Time. I kept hearing about this series. I had never heard of it. I think I saw those books in the bookstores when I was like in the 90s, but I had never really heard of it otherwise. And I think I started hearing about it on Booktube, obviously, and I just wanted to get into it, and it was like a 14 book series, and I was like, okay, let's do it. And I read this first book, The Eye of the World, and at first I was like, oh, okay, it's all right, but it kept coming back in my mind, and I was like very fascinated. Even the ending is a bit strange, and I loved the interactions. I loved the main characters from the beginning, like Rand. The first person we meet is Rand and his father, and the way they just hang out and they do their chores, and they're very meticulous about what they're doing and very intentional. I just loved it so much. I was hooked right away. And then you have all the there's a lot of traveling in that first book, but I enjoyed it because you can see the interactions between Rand and Matt, and even if Matt is out of it, no, light spoiler, he's just they take care of each other so much. So I was just I wanted to keep going, and I didn't. It took me about a year and 14 months about that to read it. I read one every month or so, and yeah, even the slog that everyone talks about was fine. Some of the books are not good, but they're not that bad. So I was really into it. Another series I read was The Grey Coats by Sébastien de Castel. Yes, I love this too. That's a trend. That first book is so fast paced. It's like they jump from fire to pan, back into the fire, back into the pan, and back and forth. I just couldn't believe it. It's the most fast paced thing I've ever read. And yeah, I love the interactions between the three main characters, our three boys. They're like the three musketeers, and just so much fun, and also very dark. Like in that series, there's things that happen that are so dark, but there's always a light-hearted way of dealing with things. So that's why I enjoyed it so much, I think. But definitely, I love this series. I think it's very divisive. Not everybody likes it. There's like people who love it and people who are like, oh, I don't get it. I loved it, so I would recommend reading that. It's just super easy to read as well. So Brasti, Kest, and Falkio are they're the greatest trio ever. And then a couple more. The only series I had finished by Brandon Sanderson before I started this year was Mistborn. I read that a few years ago as well. That's my classically like very average, but it's the first books I've read since when I started back into fantasy, when I started reading fantasy more. And yeah, it's a great place to start, so why not? I don't mind doing like everyone else. So yeah, I loved it. I loved the first book, The Final Empire. They call it Mistborn now. And I was just very impressed by that book. I think the setting is amazing. Like, it's dark and dreary, and the characters are all very, very worn out, and the magic is great. And I read also the second series, like the Mistborn Era 2, and I also enjoyed it. Like, a lot of people don't, but I enjoyed it. I loved Wax. Everyone says he's super boring, but I really loved him. He reminds me of a Mr. Darcy, or of a character who was a bit like he was a bit more stoic and is a bit more inside himself, but he's yeah, I just enjoyed him. So Mistborn is a super great place to start if you want to read fantasy, or if you want to read Brandon Sanderson, absolutely. And the ending is just amazing, jaw drop, everything. And finally, my last series I finished before I started Booktube is one of my favorites. So you see the trend, I've enjoyed all of the series I've read since I started Booktube as sci-fi and fantasy. I think it's a part that it's my thing. Like, fantasy is my jam, and sci-fi as well. And also that watch Booktube, so I know I select things that I think I'm gonna enjoy, and I usually do. So different levels of enjoyment, but mostly positive. So this series is called Seven Waters by Juliette Marillier, and The Daughter of the Forest is the first book. It's a retelling of a fairy tale by the Grimm brothers. I think it's about the wild swans. So there's like a family, and there's lots of little of boys and one girl, and the father remarries, kind of a witch, and she turns everyone into swans. And except for the girl, she escapes, and the girl's task is to turn back her brothers into humans. So the task is very, very difficult, and she's alone, and she's essentially a child, and she's very resilient, lovely. Sorka is the main character, and she's one of my favorites. She's not kick-ass. She doesn't have a sword. She doesn't fight, really. She just is very strong and keeps going no matter what. And it's one of the best love stories I've read in any book. It's beautiful, and it doesn't take a lot of space in this story, but it's so strong, so great that I felt it to my core. And yeah, the ending is amazing, and this is a part of a trilogy, so the Seven Waters trilogy, and each book has a different character, a main character, and they're all different, but they're all amazing. So very strong women. I love it. And there's a second trilogy after that, but you don't have to read it. Like, I've read it, but they're a bit less good. The first trilogy is better, but I would say if you like this, if you love this, then read the second trilogy. Of course, why not? They're not that difficult to read, but definitely read this, and you can even treat that as a standalone. So I read that like 20 years ago, something, and I didn't know there was sequels, so I treated it as a standalone, and I've reread it since, and then I realized it was a trilogy, and I was ecstatic. And I've reread them a few times, so I definitely highly recommend this. It's set in Ireland in the Middle Ages, and there's a lot of mystical beings like Tuatha De Danann and the old ones who are more like the Fomori, and it has a lot of mythology in it. So if you enjoy that, like historical fiction / fantasy, you would enjoy that for sure. So here are all the series I've read since before I started Booktube in sci-fi and fantasy. Let me know if you've read any of them, if you love some of them as much as I do, and let me know from what I've mentioned there if some series that you think I would love, like I'm looking for recommendations. Thank you, and see you next time.